We bring in David Naylor of TSN, with the NFL being the number one thing on the radar right now for everybody. How you doing, Dave?
Very well, Rod. How about yourself?
Good. I know you can talk NFL just as good or better than CFL. So what did you think about Andy Dalton joining the Cowboys? Does this make them more of a contender than they might have been?
Well, I mean, he's not going to play, right, unless something happens with Dak. So it's like valuing, what's the value of a backup quarterback? Nothing if you don't need him. A lot if you do. And, to the point about CFL, NFL, one of the things about the CFL in a smaller league, you can have a trend rip through your league a lot faster than you can in the National Football League. And the trend that we all saw last year was quarterbacks getting hurt. And, thankfully, I mean, it was, what is it, 3 or 4 years ago, the same thing happened. And the next crew of quarterbacks that stepped in was not game ready, and the games were hard to watch. And so thank goodness that last year it ended up opening up opportunities. And I do think it's kind of created a mentality in the league that, hey, you got to have two, and that is important. I mean, where would the Saskatchewan Roughriders be without Cody Fajardo last season? And you can go on and on. I mean, you look even like a player like Vernon Adams Jr., who began the year, people forget, as the backup in Montreal, and ended up, there's two guys there who began the year as number twos, and both, I believe, were their respective teams' MOP nominees. So that's a pretty good example of the value of a backup quarterback if you need him. I'm not sure what Andy Dalton is at this stage of his career. I mean, I don't believe he's ever won a playoff game. Has he been a bust? By no means. Of course, we know he comes from the same hometown as Bo Levi Mitchell. He's a Texas guy, Katy, Texas. But I don't necessarily see it as dramatically changing the Cowboys, standing in the National Football League.
Watching, he says, Foles and Wentz seemed to work. Eagles winning a Super Bowl, of course, with a two-quarterback system. Well, you know what I mean. A competent backup, I guess, would be the best way to put it.
Yeah, it's more than a competent backup than a true two-quarterback system, which is, like, pretty rare, right?
Nelson Hackowich, one of our viewers, writes in and says, TSN's draft ratings up 116%. People are starved for sports. Take us back to Thursday night and how that went from your perspective.
You know what? I'm going to give you guys a little secret. It went a lot better than it did in rehearsals. Often you hear Joe Buzz the opposite, right? Oh my God, it was perfect in rehearsals, and then we went out there and no. Honestly, we had two rehearsals. Basically, we had kind of a technical rehearsal on the Monday just to make sure it would work, because everybody was set up from the home. Even somebody like myself, you guys can see my home studio in the backdrop here. I have a home studio before anybody heard of COVID-19. So mine was, fairly well, but even they had to drive up basically a more reliable, I'm going to use generic language here, but a more reliable transmitter, so that I was not as dependent on Wi-Fi and things like that if I was going to be on the air for 2.5 hours. So we had a technical rehearsal on Monday. We kind of went through 2 blocks of the show, just with mock picks and, fake analysis and those kind of things. We did that on Wednesday. We did another one of those, kind of about 45 minutes to air on Thursday. But I think there was amongst all of us a bit of a slight sense of apprehension about what we were doing. And look, I know I'm going to speak positively about my employer, who wouldn't, right, when they're still paying you during a pandemic. But I will say I'm really proud that TSN tried that. And, I would say 3-4 weeks ago, what we were hearing originally was like SportsCenter is not live right now. SportsCenter is usually a live show. Right now, it's packaged between 3:30 and 5 o'clock Eastern time, and has been since we came back on the air after the original 2-week hiatus. So I don't believe we have done a live show until that draft. So it's not like something we're doing every week. And originally the sense was, look, we may not be able to pull off a live show, so maybe the day after the draft, we will do a draft recap show going through each team, blah, blah, blah. Then word came out about 10 days or so before that, you know what? We're going to do it, and we're going to try it. So I'm very proud to work for a company that tried that. And just among the producers and the directors and the guys, those of us that were on air for that show, we got tremendously positive feedback. I think people appreciated the challenge we were up against. And it was really gratifying, both from just a personal standpoint and to kind of read the feedback the day after and how much people appreciated what we were able to do. And as I say, went much better than in rehearsals.
Yeah, well, it came off to me, looked very much like the NFL draft, and I think they had 55 million viewers on ESPN. So I'll say kudos to you guys. Mm-hmm. By the way, our director of scouting, Craig Smith's watching, 2-time Grey Cup champion. He says, y'all did a great job on the draft coverage last Thursday. It was nice to hear all opinions on each pick. John in Winnipeg says, I listened to Dave Naylor late last night on 1290 CJBK. Does this guy ever sleep? Big Dave Naylor fan. CFL rocks. Dave, I don't know about you, but we're not breaking rocks here. We're not splitting atoms. We're not digging ditches. And we're talking sports. I think you kind of look at it the same way as I do.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I love sports, but I try to keep mindful of its actual place in society. And if anybody's, I actually had a bit of an epiphany on this, Ron. I think this is the word you're going down. About 7 or 8 years ago, I thought I was having a heart attack one day, and I wasn't. I had something kind of that can mimic the symptoms of a heart attack. But I had to go to the emergency room and get like blood thinners put in my mouth, a needle shot in my arms. And in that moment, shouldn't probably have taken this, I realized how unimportant what I do is. That the world could quite function fine if there was no CFL insider hit tomorrow, like some fans would miss. But the world doesn't break down when that stuff's not there. It's entertainment, right? It's distraction. It's fun. And, people who are out saving people's lives today and trying to keep people alive. I remember saying not joking, but I actually said to the guy who was my nurse that day, like, man, like if you ever doubt what you do matters, let me tell you, it does a lot more than what I do. And I've had that thought a few times, obviously within the last few weeks thinking of that, because sports does matter. And I'm glad that we're pushing on and doing things like the CFL draft. But in the great hierarchy of things, let's not kid ourselves.
I had a similar epiphany, and I'll tell that later because I don't want to waste your time with it, because it is a good story. Darren just heard it last week. Yeah, it was when I woke up on the floor of the Toronto airport, woke up in a layover and couldn't move. It's a whole other story. But to the pandemic, thoughts on Twitter as to where we're going. And I opened the show by saying, well, nobody knows where this is going to go because nobody knows where the curve is going to go. But your take on where we're at in a society right now on day 54, I think, without sports, or at least, since it came on our radar.
I mean, it's so surreal to be without sports this long. I mean, I guess there was the thing that hit me the first week was just the idea, the instinct to grab my remote control at about 9:15 Eastern time and do what I usually do, which is scan the NHL games, scan the NBA games, and see which ones I want to watch the second half of. Because I'm these days I'm less of a sit down and watch 3 hours of a game guy, especially when it's a sport I don't cover. Obviously, I watch CFL and NFL games start to finish all the time. But for other sports, I just kind of do the late night pickup. What am I going to jump in on? And how kind of vacant the dial seemed right, when you were doing that. But I think that the big thing that sports has had to come to grips with, and not necessarily always right away, is kind of where does it fit in the priorities? And here's one of the things that I noticed as a difference here, Rod. Do you remember after 9/11 or after Katrina or other tragedies that have happened within our lifetime, when sports comes back, it's welcome with open arms. People put both arms around it and hugged it and said, thank God you're back. Thank you for helping us heal and all this kind of stuff, which is, I think, by and large sincere. We all remember the World Series after 9/11 and those kinds of things. When baseball first floated that idea, or it got reported that they were going to fly everybody to Arizona and give people tests and sequester players, there was as much pushback saying, are you out of your minds? Like, where are your priorities? Sorry, we don't care about this right now. And where exactly are you getting these tests? And who's not getting tests because you're getting tests? And what happens if your players need to go to the hospital? There was as much kind of pushback as there was people saying, oh, great, this will give us a sense of normalcy. I can't wait to have baseball back on my TV. And I don't remember that's what set this apart. It wasn't universal. Yes, let's get sports back. That is a priority. We need it. Because, of course, in all those other scenarios, everything else was coming back at the same time. And people's lives weren't being endangered, possibly, by playing games. That's what I think is kind of different about this one, is everybody's like, okay, if you can do this and you're not endangering anybody and you're not taking resources away from people who might need them for something more important than millionaires playing baseball, okay. And now we're sort of going down that same road with the Canadian Football League because of the request for government assistance. It's like, well, okay, if you want to do this yourself, all right, and you're not endangering anybody, but now you're asking the federal government, and I get why CFL fans want to see this happen, say this is no different than a restaurant who's been told their customers can't come into the restaurant. The government told the CFL its fans can't come into the stands. But I also understand that said this is entertainment and this is professional sports entertainment. And no, they're not gazillionaires and billionaire owners like in the National Football League or the NBA, but it's still entertainment. And that's not my priority right now. And it shouldn't be ours. I get that as well.
So where do you sit on things? Because I know that you have thoughts on America opening up certain segments, pockets of population, and that it's dangerous to do so. So where are you on coming back as a society and the timing?
You know what I want? Here's what I want. I want truth. Okay. And here's what I mean. And I'm going to use a football analogy. What was the issue with concussions and the National Football League? The issue was not that football is dangerous. It's not that you can get concussed and that you could suffer brain damage. It's that the National Football League was accused of not being truthful with its players. It's like anything in life. Just tell me what the risk is, right? I'll make a choice. And maybe as a society, we have to make a choice. This one is, I don't want to make it sound like totally individualistic, because in this pandemic, you can make a choice for yourself that kills somebody else. But I just mean as a society, let's be truthful about what the risk is to us as a society and to us as individuals and our family members. That's really what I'm trying to stand up for here in this whole situation. What's wrong is when you lie to people about what the risks are, right? When you say it's 15 cases and it's going to 0, or it's no different than the flu, or any other number of quotes you want to take from the guy who sits in the White House, right? And that's my issue with him. It's not ideological, because I don't know what ideology embraces lies. That's not conservatism. That's not liberalism. Like no ideology I know says, yeah, just tell us absolute bull bleep. Like, just be honest. Like the same way the National Football League should have been honest with players once it knew what the effects of concussions were, and ultimately had to pay out a ton of money because they weren't forthright and honest with them, because guys were making decisions based on false information. That's what I want to see in our society. If your society in Texas, you got 1,000 new cases a day, and you had your highest death rate not long ago, and you want to open up as a society, that's what your society values. Okay, but be honest with people about what that's going to mean. And the same thing if you're making different kind of decisions, and the ones we're making here in Canada. That's really what really bothers me in this is just people blue skying stuff and saying things. And you said this earlier, Rob, we don't know, right? So when a politician comes out and says, we think this will be behind us by, the Labor Day or Memorial Day weekend. Well, okay. First of all, you don't know that because the pandemic scientists don't know that. I mean, you look at that model, the University of Washington model that the White House was citing up until April 8th, said 60,000 deaths in the U.S. by August 4th. They missed by 98 days. 98 days on a 5-month prognostication projection. So we don't know, okay? So don't go out and pretend you do. That's the kind of stuff that bothers me.
Dave Naylor of TSN hijacking Rod's rant today. Thank you. Makes my day easier for Bronco Plumbing and Heating, your factory authorized Brian furnace dealer. And yeah, there you go. And by the way, I am with you. The thing is, I've been around almost as long as you, just a couple years behind. I don't believe any of what I hear from anybody. And I used to be the opposite, but I've seen too many people lie standing at a podium. I just don't believe much of what I hear. So I'm going by what I'm hearing from the leaders. And that's why the Randy Ambrosies of the world make so much money, because they're the ones that are really stressed right now, trying to decide what's best for their particular entities, And so maybe that's where I'll wrap up. Your thoughts on the federal funding, whether you think it's even going to happen or not. And obviously you're getting asked every day multiple times if there's going to be a season. So what's your thoughts on all that?
Again, these are just instinct things. And some of it is trying to read the tone of people in the league I'm talking to. I won't be surprised if there's government assistance to the Canadian Football League. I think there's a case for it. It's not the same as, if had the league run itself into the ground and asked for a business bailout based on bad decisions it made or poor business forecasting. I think, again, and people have said, well, it's not an essential business and it doesn't bring money into Canada. Okay, but if the list of businesses that we're going to help out of this situation is going to require you to be an essential service or bringing money into Canada, that's going to be a short list. Like that, the restaurant on the corner does not meet either of those either, but we're going to help out those kinds of things. So I don't think it's the same as if the league had, driven itself into the ditch and wanted help out. Here's my concern. My concern is, does the league potentially do more damage to itself long term if it tries to play and fails than if it just takes a knee right now. And here's what I mean. Let's say the federal government comes through and they say, we'll give you the $30 million right now, and we'll give you, we're on tap for another 100, or to get to 100, to help you play the season. Great. Canadian Football League gets what it wants. It can use the money to replace the revenue that used to come from fans and stands. What happens if there's a breakout on a team on October 2nd? What happens if a second wave hits October 10th? What happens if you burn through $100 million in government money and still can't play the season? How do you go to them next spring and say, our league's in tatters, and there's the only way we can get it up and going financially is to get assistance from the government, because what the comeback to that's going to be, right? No way. So that's my worry. And I wonder if the league might not be better to take a knee right now and say, look, there's so much uncertainty ahead. We can't run the risk that we try and play and something goes horribly wrong, or we got to shut it down. I mean, put it this way. If you had one shot to play football with the government assisting you, would you take that shot this fall or next spring? I'd be tempted to take it next spring. But again, there may be things I'm not thinking of, the implications of not playing, that may be far more dire than my understanding is. But on the surface, that's my fear. So here's what I think is going to happen in the long term. I think the government will give some assistance to the Canadian Football League to keep it functioning as a business. I will not be surprised if the CFL does not play this year, not because it decides not to play, but because the government regulations that prevent you from doing something like holding a football practice right now are going to be probably in place through the course of the summer, or maybe. So the decision will be made for the Canadian Football League. If you can't assemble training camp before Labor Day, I don't think you can have a season. So this decision may be made for the CFL, and then maybe they get another good chunk of change devoted to and directed to next spring to make sure that the league is functioning and up and ready for a 2021 season. That is my best guess about what might happen. Government assistance, but maybe more targeted towards 2021 than 2020. But that's, again, I'm guessing like everybody else.
But frankly, how could you argue with that? Because that's for the safety of the public and the players and the staff. Who could argue with that?
Nobody. I mean, ultimately, I don't think this is going to be the league's case. I'm right now concerned about the long-term viability of the Canadian Football League. And I've had people reach out to me on DM saying, "Do you really think the CFL could, fold or collapse if the government does get this assistance?" And I say, somebody's got to show me who's paying the bills. Like, if the government's not, okay, and there's who's paying? Like, who's reaching? Most of the private owners in this league subsidize these teams already to a relatively significant tune. Depends whether you're talking about Toronto or Ottawa or Hamilton or whatever, but there's people putting money into this league more than there are people taking it out. So which of those ones is standing up saying, yep, I'm not only going to stand up and put a ton of money into my franchise to keep it viable, but I'm going to do it to help the others. And, with the publicly owned teams, I think there are issues about whether they're even legally allowed to take on debt or borrow money. And I believe in at least two of the three cases, they're not. So, if someone's got to show me who's paying for this if the federal government doesn't come through. And until that question can be answered, we can't safely say, come on, the league's not going to fold. The league's not going to shut down. Okay, who's paying the bills? No one's answered that right now. Maybe it won't, maybe it would. On a bigger scale, I keep saying to people, look, someday in the future, and I don't know when, we're all kind of swearing off timelines, there are a half dozen stadiums in this country that have either been newly built or significantly refitted in the last 10 years. There's no shortage of players, Canadians and Americans, that want to play this game. And there is a television network, my employer, that makes CFL football a cornerstone of its programming between June and November. As long as those three things exist, there will be a professional football league in Canada. But can that league play through a global pandemic without government assistance? I don't know. And so I just would say I would caution anyone not to underestimate the severity of the situation where the CFL is concerned.
From our viewer, Tyler, he says, this segment has made me a fan of Dave Naylor. And that is what's great about this show. We are way over time, though, for the top of the hour. So, David, thank you, my friend. Keep doing what you're doing. We're following real closely. Good job.
Thanks, Rod. Always enjoy being on your show with you.
The great Dave Naylor, TSN CFL Insider, joining us.
You're watching Rod Pedersen On Demand. For more of The Rod Pedersen Show, visit rodpedersen.com or follow Rod Pedersen on social media.